Whispering Pines Ranch by Everett Cole. The sun sank low over the jagged peaks of the Montana Rockies, bathing the Whispering Pines Ranch in hues of gold and crimson. Abigail Malone, a spirited woman of 28, stood on the front porch of the ranch house, the cool wooden railing grounding her in the moment. Her chestnut hair was swept into a loose braid, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face. She scanned the horizon, watching the ranch hands return with the cattle. Her heart quickened when she spotted Caleb Turner among them. Caleb was the foreman of Whispering Pines, a man of few words but plenty of action. His weathered hat shadowed his rugged features, but Abigail could still see the kindness in his cobalt eyes. He dismounted his horse with practiced ease, his broad shoulders moving fluidly. Abigail's pulse raced, but she chided herself for letting her thoughts linger. Caleb was a man devoted to his work, and she had a ranch to run. Abigail inherited Whispering Pines from her father a year ago after his unexpected passing. Managing the sprawling ranch with its hundreds of heads of cattle and acres of untamed land had been daunting. Caleb's steadfast presence had been her anchor. Though their conversations often revolved around ranch matters, there was an unspoken connection between them, a tether Abigail couldn't explain. That evening, after the hands had eaten and the moon rose high, Caleb lingered by the barn. Abigail approached, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Long day?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with weariness. Caleb turned, tipping his hat. "Every day's long on a ranch, but we're making good progress." Abigail leaned against the barn door. "I couldn't do this without you, Caleb. The ranch wouldn't survive." "You'd manage?" Caleb said softly. "You're stronger than you think, Abigail." For a moment, their eyes met, and the world seemed to still. Abigail's cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked away. "I'd better get some rest. Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Miss Malone," he replied, his voice low and warm. The days passed in a flurry of activity. Spring storms threatened the herds, and fences needed mending. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in faster than anyone anticipated. Abigail and Caleb worked side by side, racing to secure the cattle. Thunder rumbled, and the first drops of rain splattered the dusty ground. "We need to head back," Caleb shouted over the wind, his voice barely audible. "Not yet. There's a calf stuck by the creek," Abigail called back, already sprinting toward the struggling animal. Caleb cursed under his breath and followed. The swollen creek was treacherous, but Abigail waded in without hesitation. The calf bleated, its legs tangled in the underbrush. Abigail struggled to free it, the icy water numbing her fingers. Caleb reached her just as the current threatened to sweep her away. "Let me," he growled, pulling her back with one arm while steadying himself against the current. Together they freed the calf and guided it to safety. Soaked and shivering, they reached the barn as the storm reached its peak. Caleb lit a lantern, the warm glow casting flickering shadows. Abigail's hands trembled as she brushed her wet hair from her face. "You're reckless," Caleb said, his voice tight with frustration. "You could have been hurt." "I couldn't leave it," Abigail retorted. "This ranch is everything to me." Caleb stepped closer, his expression softening. "And you're everything to this ranch." Abigail's breath caught. The intensity in his gaze left no room for doubt. Her heart pounded as Caleb reached out, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek. "Abigail," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion. Before she could respond, the barn door banged open, and one of the ranch hands burst in. "Storm's letting up, but the fence near the south pasture is down." The moment shattered and Caleb stepped back. "I'll handle it," he said briskly, grabbing his hat. Abigail watched him go, her emotions a whirlwind. As spring gave way to summer, the tension between Abigail and Caleb became impossible to ignore. The ranch hands noticed the way Caleb's eyes followed her, and Abigail's best friend, Clara, teased her mercilessly. "Why don't you just tell him how you feel?" Clara asked one evening as they sat on the porch, sipping lemonade. Abigail sighed. "It's not that simple. Caleb's dedicated to this ranch. I don't want to make things complicated." "Love is always complicated," Clara said with a grin. "But it's worth it." Abigail wasn't so sure. But the thought of a future without Caleb left her feeling hollow. The annual harvest dance was the highlight of the season. The barn was transformed with lanterns and garlands, and the townsfolk gathered in their finest attire. Abigail wore a sapphire blue dress that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. She caught Caleb's breath hitch when he saw her, but he quickly looked away. Abigail danced with several suitors that evening, but her heart wasn't in it. Her gaze kept drifting to Caleb, who stood by the wall, his expression unreadable. Finally, summoning her courage, she approached him. Are you going to stand there all night, or will you dance with me? She challenged, holding out her hand. Caleb's lips quirked into a rare smile. I reckon I can manage one dance. As they moved to the music, the rest of the world faded away. Caleb's hand was warm against her back, and the closeness made her heart race. When the song ended, he led her outside, the cool night air a welcome relief. I've been meaning to talk to you, Caleb began, his voice steady but his eyes uncertain. About what? Abigail asked, though she already knew. Caleb took a deep breath. About us. About what this is. Abigail's heart pounded. And what do you think it is? Something I don't want to lose, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Abigail's breath caught. You won't, she promised, her voice trembling. Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle yet firm. I'm not good with words, Abigail, but I'll spend my life showing you how much you mean to me. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. That's all I've ever wanted. Their kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. As the stars sparkled above, they knew their love was as enduring as the land they called home. A year later, Abigail and Caleb stood on the same porch where their journey began, their hands entwined. Whispering Pines was thriving, and so was their love. Together they faced the challenges of ranch life, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The ranch hands often joked that the heart of Whispering Pines wasn't the land or the cattle, but the love shared by its owners. And as Abigail and Caleb watched the sunset, they couldn't help but agree.